In this week's parsha, we have the mitzvah of bikurim. One would have to bring from the first of the fruit to the Beis Hamikdash to the Kohen. The fruit would have to be brought in a basket or some sort of container. And in our Sikha, the Rebbe is going to explain the Rambam's unique approach regarding these baskets. The Rambam says that if a person brought the bikurim in a metal container, then the Kohen would take the bikurim and the container goes back to the owner. If he brought it in a basket made of branches, leaves, reeds, etc., then the bikurim, then the baskets remain by the Kohen. The baskets go to the Kohen. The Rebbe asks, the basis for this halacha is in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says the rich people would bring their bikurim in baskets of silver and gold. The poor people would bring them in baskets made of willow branches or other sort of twigs and reeds, etc., and the baskets and the bikurim would be given to the Kohanim. The Gemara says that this Mishnah is the basis for a common thing that people say, that poverty follows the poor, which seems to be telling us that the difference between the silver baskets, the golden baskets, versus the ones made of the reeds and the branches, etc., is all dependent on what we're assuming the person that gave it had in mind. That is, since the rich people are giving these expensive vessels, what we're saying is probably they weren't planning to give the vessels away to the Kohanim, and that's why they go back to the owner. The poor people that were bringing the simple baskets made of these reeds, etc., were probably planning to give away the baskets as well. This will explain what the Gemara is saying, that poverty follows the poor. That's because they were poor, they brought these cheaper baskets, and now they're giving away the baskets as well. But the problem is that the Rambam doesn't mention anything about rich or poor. All the Rambam speaks about is the material of the vessel. Is it made of metal? Is it made of branches, reeds, etc.? Which seems to be saying that it's not about what the person had in mind, whether he's rich or poor. It's just a difference in the kind of vessel itself. And the way he would explain the Gemara of poverty following the poor would just be because, well, usually the one who's bringing the baskets made of these reeds and branches, etc., usually is the poor person. So we need to understand what is the reason for the Rambam. Why is he making this difference between the actual material of the keli itself? The Rebbe now looks at the Sifri, which seems to be telling us something similar. The Sifri on the pasuk v'lokach hatenem yodecha, that the Kohen takes the basket from your hand. The Sifri says from here we learn that the rich people would bring baskets of silver and gold. The poor people would bring baskets made of branches, etc. The branches would be given to the Kohanim. Then the Sifri says liskois matana lekohanim, to give a gift to the Kohanim. The Mefarshim explain that the Sifri is learning all of this in the words v'lokach hatenem. He'll take the basket. It's only if it's a simple basket that's when it goes to the Kohanim. And what does it mean, liskois matana lekohanim, to give a gift to the Kohanim? The Tosfos Yom Tov explains that since the poor person is giving very little fruit, so therefore the Chachamim instituted to give the basket as well. So the basket will make that along together with the fruit now will be a more choshev, a more appropriate fitting gift for the Kohen. But the Rebbe says, again, it's difficult to learn that this is what the Rambam has in mind. Because again, we're mainly emphasizing the amount of fruit, which is going to depend. If you're rich, you're giving more fruit. If you're poor, you're giving less fruit. And that's why, if you're giving less, give the basket as well. But the Rambam doesn't make a difference between the rich and poor and how much you're giving. All he says is a difference, what kind of vessel you're giving, so we're still trying to understand why that is. To explain this, says the Rebbe, let's first look at this idea of giving the basket to the Kohanim, which is a number of ways of learning what this actually means, what the definition of it is. One way of understanding it is, the main connection between these baskets and the bikurim is mainly when you're bringing it to the Beis Hamikdash. It needs to be in a basket, the Torah says. But then there's another obligation that in certain situations you also need to give the basket itself to the Kohen, but it's a separate obligation, not connected directly, inherently to the bikurim itself. Another way of understanding it is that no, the giving of the basket is connected with the giving of the bikurim. Not that but still, not that the action of the giving is exactly the same as giving the bikurim, but when you gave the bikurim, this draws along with it another obligation of giving the baskets as well. A third way of looking at it says that is even more than that. Not only is there two obligations and one bringing the other, but it's also connected in the act of giving. It needs to be one act of giving them both together. What's the practical difference between all these different ways? Says the Rebbe, according to the first way, that the connection is only in when you bring the basket, but then when you're giving the basket, it's not inherently connected to the Bikurim. So perhaps you should be able to give the basket to any Kohen. It doesn't even have to be actually from the group of Kohanim that are working currently in the Beis HaMikdash called the Mishmar. Bikurim does have to, but the basket perhaps you can give to any Kohen. According to the second way, that the obligation of giving the basket is as a result of giving the Bikurim, so one brings along the other. So then perhaps you would have to say that you have to give it at least to a Kohen of that Mishmar, just like Bikurim itself needs to be given to the people of the Mishmar. But not necessarily you have to give it to the very same Kohen. But if we say the connection is even in the act of giving, it has to be in one act, then perhaps you would actually have to give it to the same Kohen. Says the Rebbe, we could say that these three different ways of looking at it would actually be fitting with the various different sources that we quoted before. There's the Sifri and the simple reading of the Sifri. There's then that Gemara about poverty following the poor, the way Rashi explains it, as we'll see in a minute. And then there's the Sifri, the way we quoted it based on some of the Mefarshim, the Tosfos Yom Tov, etc., as we said before. So to look at all of them carefully now. The Sifri, at least the simple reading of the Sifri, learns this idea of giving the baskets to the Kohen, and from V'lokach HaKohen Aterem Yodecha, the Kohen takes the basket from your hand. That means that there's a separate obligation in giving the basket, which is not part of the Bikurim itself. According to this one, the Sifri says, Liskois matana l'koyanim, to give a present to the Koyanim. What it means is that the poor person has another schus, another opportunity to give something to the Kohen. He also gives the basket to the Kohen. But it's separate to the Bikurim, which is more like the first option that we said. The second way, which is the Gemara. We said that the Gemara uses this idea of the rich and the poor as a source for the concept of poverty following the poor. And as Rashi points out, because the rich don't give the baskets to the Kohanim. What is this telling us? In other words, that the giving of the basket is connected with the fact that they are poor. And they are giving the basket in addition to the Bikurim, but not necessarily that it's one action. On the contrary, when we say poverty follows the poor, it sounds like it's two separate things. Number one, he's poor, so he gave a small amount of Bikurim. And number two, not only that, but he also has to give the basket. So that's option number two. This is like the second way of learning it. And finally, there's the third way, as the Tosfos Yom Tov learned the Sifri, which we quoted before, that the point is that because the poor people are giving a small amount, then with the basket, it's now going to be a proper, nice gift for the Kohen. This seems to be telling us that it needs to be given together as one thing so that the Kohen should actually have something. So this is all three different ways of looking at it. But we're still looking for the Rambam. Says the Rebbe, according to the Rambam, we're actually going to look at it in a fourth way. And with it, which is a bigger novelty over all of the previous ones. Not only are the baskets connected to the Bikurim in the action of giving, but according to the Rambam will come out that the baskets become like one thing with the Bikurim. They become like one and the same. Not only are you giving them together. In other words, when is the Bikurim going to be proper Bikurim? When they're brought in a Keli. And furthermore, this Keli, this vessel, became part of the Bikurim. In fact, this is why the Rambam brings this whole halacha about the Keli going to the Kohanim in continuation to the halacha that the Bikurim need to have a vessel. And in regards to this, really, there won't be a difference between any type of Keli. In other words, in all situations, the Keli needs to become part of the Bikurim. The Rambam then says there's another halacha, that in the case of a metal Keli, well, now this needs to go back to the owner. In other words, as far as the mitzvah of Bikurim itself is concerned, the metal Keli is also part of the Bikurim. But now there's a special halacha that it goes back to the owner as opposed to the ones made of the reeds and the branches, etc. Why would there be a difference? Says the Rebbe, because the ones made of the branches and the leaves are more essentially and inherently, naturally connected to the fruit inside of them. Metal is a totally different material to the fruit. Yes, the mitzvah says put the fruits into the basket, but ultimately they're not one and the same. Whereas the connection between the branches, the leaves, and the fruits is because of its natural way of being. It's a plant. And in its value, it's more similar. And therefore, once you have the mitzvah also to put them together, now they literally became like one. And therefore, the basket of Bikurim became completely as one. And in this case, it goes to the Kohen and doesn't even return from the Kohen. It remains by the Kohen. Based on this, the Rebbe also explains a few other diyukim in the Rambam. But we're going to move now to the part that the Rebbe explains al pi chassidus. The Rebbe says at the end of the day, we still need to understand what's this idea that Bikurim needs to be in a basket. And when it's in the basket made of branches and leaves, then there's even a bigger connection between the Bikurim and the basket. And they become one and the same. And the Rebbe asks, seemingly Bikurim represents something of a very high caliber, something of a very perfect situation. We bring from the 7 special fruits. We have to bring from the best of the fruit, from the first of the fruit. And at the same time, he's saying that the holiness of the Bikurim and fulfillment properly has to be in a keli, which is in a certain way limiting it, putting a container, putting something of a limitation on it. And furthermore, we said, when is it going to be even more b'shleimus? When is it going to become completely one with the keli? That's if it's going to be a simple keli, the one made of the leaves and the branches. So the Rebbe explains. Bikurim, as we know, alludes to the Yidden, and specifically the neshama of the Yid, the way it's rooted up above, where it's Bikurim, it's the first, it precedes everything, precedes all of creation. In fact, it even precedes the Torah itself. When the neshama is up above, it's connected to Hashem in the most amazing way. And yet, what do we say? The neshama has to come down into a guf, like the Bikurim coming into a keli, into a vessel, which seemingly is limiting it, seemingly is hiding on its connection to Hashem. But we know that, of course, you read the Tzorech Aliyah, the whole point of the descent is to come to even a greater level. It specifically as a result of coming down here. That this is where it's revealed how a neshama is truly one with Hashem. And this is just like we know the neshama comes down in this world to be involved in the gashmis, the things, the most lowliest things, to do mitzvahs of action. And this then brings to the greatest aliyah, to the greatest ascent, when we have the essence of Hashem being revealed, lost in love, and how is Tchis HaMesim going to be again, specifically to a neshama in a physical body. And why is all of that? Because we know Hashem created the world because He wanted a dira b'tachtonim. Hashem wanted specifically to be in the lowliest places. So says the Rebbe, just like spiritually, the idea of Bikurim is specifically, which is a neshama specifically to be in a keli, in a guf, so too the physical mitzvah of Bikurim is also, we bring it to the Beis HaMikdash, to the holiest place, but where do we bring it? Specifically in a keli. And furthermore, when do we say that you have the ultimate union between the fruit and the keli? We said is in the simple keli, like we said before, because the ultimate is when it comes dira b'tachtonim, in the lowliest of things. And the Rebbe concludes that by learning about all of these things, we'll be zoicha taken from Yad Mamish to bring Bikurim in the third Beis HaMikdash, Yibaneh b'meilev yameinu, Ayidei Mashiach Tzidkenu.